much more. It's the heart of the art form that we all adore. Your friendly neighborhood comic book store. Out among the stacks of new releases, browsing with your future new best friends. You're gonna find a book you'll love to pieces. The girl behind the counter recommends dollar books and shelves of graphic novels. Titles old and new, you'll find them all. With action figures, board games, toys, and models to add to your new Comic Wednesday haul. The comic book store, the comic book store. 'Cause that's where the books live, but it's also much more. It's the heart of the art form that we all adore. Your friendly neighborhood comic book store.
Yes, indeed. We are back in the comic book store. This is Source Material Live. I'm your substitute host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And tonight, we are discussing Punisher. Say it right, say it right, say it right. The Platoon, not the Patrol. The Platoon, which is a 2017 war comic. It was a 6-issue limited series published by Marvel Comics under the Max imprint, which centered around, obviously, Frank Castle during his first tour in Vietnam as a young officer. It was written by Garth Ennis, who previously worked extensively on the character of the Punisher under the Punisher Max line. And if you'll remember, Ma Nucci had that ill communication. We did one of the Garth Ennis stories. Welcome back, Frank. Welcome back, Frank. So we have two guests here tonight. First, he's been joining me on a number of shows. He's been trading off with Alexis Haina. Ladies and gentlemen from the Cosmic Treadmill, Mr. Chris Sheehan. How do you do, sir?
Hey, we're going to be talking about the Punisher, a post-2000 Punisher where he's not going to be taking on the mob. I can't wait.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I'm excited to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like we don't get very many stories where he's not fighting the mob, so I'm happy to see one that we're going to get today.
Or killing off the entire Marvel Universe. And ladies and gentlemen, there must be some kind of way out of here, said Jesse Starcher to the thieves. Yes, this is his podcast that I've been doing, and he's back to shove me in the pool and take over and take it all back. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the prodigal, with a D, not a T, son. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to his own goddamn podcast, Jesse Starcher. How do you do, sir?
Wow. On the eve of the 6th anniversary of Source Material right here tonight, we're going to be discussing The Punisher. And that very first episode, 6 years ago on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, was Punisher, Circle of Blood. So it's a kismet, I think, is the word for it, maybe. I don't know. It's fate. You sent me a message. No, wait a second. You talked to me. You talked to me on a podcast, put me right on the spot, and you said, hey, Jesse, why don't you come on over? We're talking The Punisher on Monday. And I was like, oh, really? I'll join you. Let's do it. Let's do it to it. So tonight we're talking Punisher, The Platoon, which I've never read. So this is going to be a fun discussion.
Did you even know this existed? Because I found it like in a bookstore amongst the other trades. And as I was telling Chris Sheehan on one of our previous shows, if I can find a self-contained limited series, I'll usually, instead of putting on my pirate hat, I'll usually just go ahead and spend the money and buy it if I'm in the bookstore because I got to buy something. My kids are buying books, I got to buy something. So,
yeah.
I saw this in and amongst the trades, and I was like, oh, well, this is a self-contained story about him being in Nam. God, it reads like Sergeant Rock, doesn't it, Jesse?
I know where you're coming from there. I don't read Sergeant Rock a whole lot, but I can tell you that we covered, oh my goodness, Hell in a Hard Place. I cannot remember the name of the book, but it was the first ever Sergeant Rock, and I think the only Sergeant Rock that I'd ever read. Did it for the show where me and Ronnie, we talked about the book, then played our favorite war songs.
Yes.
War-related songs. Anyway, yeah, it feels like a great wartime story. Now, as for me knowing if this existed, no. I've heard oodles and oodles about Punisher Born, which this is the prequel to. but I did not know the Platoon existed. So jumping into this, of course, it's Garth Ennis. I'm like, okay, well, I kind of know what to expect. We've read some Garth Ennis on here. I've read it in my, some other Garth Ennis in my spare time. Heck, we even talked The Boys with Gavin Napier. And I tend to like what Garth Ennis puts out there, at least entertainment-wise. Some other people may disagree, but I was excited to see that, hey, this is Garth Ennis doing another Punisher story.
Well, that takes me to Mr. Chris Sheehan, who I've had on here, as I've said a number of times, and Chris sometimes has some feelings about some writers. He's got some opinions. And I'm just wondering, where do you stand on myth? Has Garth Ennis wronged you in a former life the way some of these other ones have, or are you good with Garth Ennis, Mr. Sheehan?
I like him.
Perfect.
That's about it. No, I have nothing bad to say about Garth Ennis. He seems like a consummate professional and gentleman, and I like the work that he puts out.
He's a bit polarizing when you look at some of the writing. I mean, obviously, there was language that was used in this that obviously it falls under the Max line, but you can tell that it's not far from easily being controversial sometimes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you and there are people online who will choose not to look at this as a period piece and will be offended by it, but this is a period piece. This is Vietnam.
I think if you're offended by this book, you're an idiot. I mean, you're just an idiot.
Tell us how you really feel.
Well, I mean, as you called it, it's a period piece.
Absolutely.
You're talking about soldiers in the thick of Vietnam. Guess what?
Life-death situations.
They didn't like the enemy. they were in a life and death struggle. Yes, the word gook got thrown around. I'm sure it did.
Yep.
You know, people I'm sure said unsavory things. I'm sure soldiers also did unsavory things with some unsavory women of the night. These things happened. And I think if you're going to accurately tell the story of Vietnam or a portion of it, these are things that you're going to have to address. And if you're offended by that, yeah, go back to reading My Little Pony, because friendship is magic.
That book offends me.
I'm sure it does. Chris, tell me real quick, did you read any of the Punisher stuff when you were, well, I guess you're still actively reading comics, but throughout the years that you've been reading comics, did you ever read any of the Punisher stuff? Because he was big when I was in high school. You know, I think of all the comic book kids, the cool comic book kids, the one who looked down their noses at people who weren't comic book enough for them, I want to say the Punisher was big, Wolverine was big, the X-Men in general, Ghost Rider, you know, anything Todd McFarlane did. So that iteration of Spider-Man, that's
Lobo.
Lobo, yeah, that was all the cool kid stuff. What about you though? Where do you stand on the Punisher?
Well, you might know about me is I'm like an all or nothing kind of guy. If I'm reading a book, I read the entire family of books. And when I came into comics, there were like a half dozen Punisher books, and there was just no way I could afford doing that, so I didn't do any of them. When I finally got money and was very stupid with it, I bought a lot of Punisher. I was there through, the end of his ongoing into him dying and becoming an angel, to them kind of pushing that off the table and saying it never happened. I remember being very excited for Bourne because the way they advertised Bourne was it was going to be like one of those evergreen books that was going to be on the shelf next to like Origin for Wolverine and Truth for Captain America. They were doing these I don't want to say upscale, but these were like big books that were just gonna inform the character forevermore. Mm-hmm. And I was so excited for Bourne, and I remember liking it. I just don't remember much about it since it was almost 20 years ago. I fell off again with the Punisher when I fell off with Marvel after Civil War, and really I've popped in because the one thing about the Punisher is he has a very, very secure home in the quarter bin. So you can find complete runs of the Punisher for a quarter apiece. So when I see a run, even if it's a book I'm not terribly interested in, I can't resist. So I will pick them up and I'll flip through them and won't usually read them too deeply. But I am a fan of the character. I like the character. I like the look. And I was pleasantly surprised by the book we're covering today, because I was nervous that it was going to be more, Frank avenging his family, fighting another leg of the mob we never heard about before. So
In gruesome ways.
Yes, it's like, wait, there's another family that was involved? Oh, we got to get them.
Yeah, I was
great.
never a huge fan of the Punisher. When I read Marvel Comics or DC Comics, I want to be taken to faraway places with people that have, extraordinary powers. Punisher was a guy with a gun shooting drug dealers.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm like, that's not exactly magical. So, I think at the time that I was reading comics, I just didn't have, I went to music for my anger outlet. I didn't necessarily go to comics for that. But boy, was I surrounded by people who just loved reading about Frank and his exploits. They loved reading about him shooting everybody in New York City. What's your attraction to the Punisher, Jesse? I know that he was a big fan. That's why I asked you to take a break from doling out the ends in Ohio, and come on and talk about your favorite character. But why do you like the Punisher so much?
It's pretty simple. I mean, really, this was a character that appealed to me when I was first collecting comics. I think I picked up the first issue of the ongoing series back in, oh my goodness, wow, I can't remember, 87, 88, I cannot remember now. But I like the fact that it was just a person trying to tackle real world, rather they are extreme issues, but they are real world issues sometimes in his book, and he did it with this sense of justice, albeit the most extreme measure of justice. If you did something wrong, if you killed somebody or were associated with a crime family and you had dirt on you, the Punisher was coming after you and you were going to answer, and he had a pretty well drawn line as to who was going to live and who was going to die. That appealed to me, of course, as a teen. Violence and an avenging person, an anti-hero, if you will, that's willing to fight a superhero or a supervillain if they need to, was a really great concept in my opinion. And when it comes to like reading the Punisher, I really am probably further behind than a lot of people who are fans of this character. The avenging angel stuff where he had changed, I don't even think I've read anything about that. I know it happened because obviously I'm going to learn a little bit about my character off the internet, but I don't think I've ever read anything. I think I probably stopped collecting the Punisher it was probably a little bit before the end of that ongoing series, and I don't recall picking up anything afterwards, unless it was Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe that was hinted to, and a few other things. But this is a human character with a very human history. Anybody can be on the on the lawn of the park and have their family gunned down, and this guy is able to, he has the means to stay alive and also exact that justice he feels needs to happen. So there's my answer for that.
Recommendation for either of you, if you're into the Punisher, but you want to see him sort of break out of his usual mode, there's a limited series. I have the trade paperback for it. It's Punisher and Doctor Strange teaming up, and the book is called Magic Bullets.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I've read that.
I think I got that as an Ollie spy.
Solid.
Yeah. Do you know about the Ollies there, Chris?
I've heard about them, and I'm very jealous that I don't have them.
No!
The closest one to me is something like 2,300 miles away. So.
Oh my
Jesus.
God.
One of these days.
If you ever come to Tampa, we'll take you to the Ollies.
It's a day.
All right. So, Punisher: The Platoon, as I said before, is a story of Frank Castle in Vietnam, and it's supposed to inform for the reader his mindset for when he becomes the Punisher, and in terms of how he thinks, how he treats the enemy, the way he strategizes, etc. Told over 6 issues. Our story begins with Punisher, Frank Castle, having been dropped on this one particular hill, and he's right out of like OC school. And this is where I'll throw it to you, Jesse, to summarize the first 2 issues.
Okay. All right. So issue 1, Crack the Sky and Shake the Earth. Michael Goodwin. We're introduced. It's kind of like there's this setting where Michael Goodwin, who is the brother, I think, of Stevie Goodwin from the first story. This is one of the guys that witnessed it witnessed Frank basically turn into, or I don't know, a best way to accept violence. That's kind of what Born is about. It's the beginnings of the Punisher. But what Michael Goodwin wants to do is write a story that happened prior to that. Like maybe there's a chance for the Punisher to turn things around. So what he's done is he's got these 4 people, I think it was 4, these 4 people that were under his command when he, just like you said, got dropped in Vietnam in I think it was 67, 68. I know he comes out of his first tour at 68. So, okay, so they all meet at a local pub. They're kind of talking about what's going on. And it's with these men that Michael Goodwin feels he can begin to show the full tale of the Punisher, as his previous book was really just about the beginning of the end of the story of Frank Castle. As Frank arrives at Hill 681, 3 clicks from the artillery base in the Khe Sanh region of South Vietnam, coming in as a second lieutenant, he is honest with those under his command that he has 0 combat experience. So this is a Punisher that has no experience with combat. I should say Frank Castle. Frank is very understanding of the attitudes of his platoon and learns they are the last in line for some of the amenities of wartime. And when Frank learns the platoon is heading out on a mission the following day, he believes it's very important to go with them and possibly see his first action of the war. The next day, the squad heads to a small village called Chu Bai, but one of the officers explains that, it's actually a sergeant, that the reports of it being abandoned are probably false due to a deal between Chu Bai's leader and the reporting patrols. When they get near the entrance of the seemingly empty village, Frank immediately calls in an airstrike. And sure enough, there were 4 armed soldiers there. Now he's actually showing that he trusts the word of his platoon. At the end of the first issue, we learn of Sister Lee Quang, a Viet Cong sniper that has been hunting Americans that was injured after the airstrike was called in on Chu Bai. She plans to exact revenge against Frank if she ever sees him again. However, her commanding officer, Senior Colonel Le Trong Giap, and I'm going to try to do that for the rest of the podcast, wants her to reconsider her plan for revenge, as he tells her soon there will be an order to take a great offensive in one transmission, crack the sky and shake the earth. And her skill may be better used then. In issue 2, which is titled, boy, Mark, this would have been great. It's called Ma Deuce. But boy, I tell you what, if you could have just changed a couple of letters, it would have been Ma Deuce.
Got the ill communication.
That's right. In issue 2, we get to the Battle of Khe Sanh. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but this is an actual battle. I looked this up. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with what the going-ons in Vietnam, but this is an actual battle that happened between January 21st and July 9th of 1968. Frank's platoon is expecting the attack as the Viet Cong gave themselves up and let them know that it was coming. The platoon wonder about Frank, as it is now inevitable he will be seeing his real first action. The men remark how during a battle, you can only focus on what's in front of you, and people's reaction to it is very different. I think one of the things he talks about in there is, as this battle's going on, one of them has just got grinning ear to ear, and he can't help but, laugh. And some people just can't handle it rationally. So on the opposite side of the attack, you see Senior Colonel Le Trong Giap, who is a man governed by orders and in a situation of trying to lead and handle the things that are going on around him. Giap calls for Sister Lee and tries to talk her out of her thirst for vengeance against Castle, as he knows she is very smart and a capable soldier. And this obsession could ruin the potential she has to actually participate in the overall war. Back to the battle on Hill 681, the platoon is being overrun. Frank sees this and calls out to put bayonets on their guns, and it's here that his platoon can see he has an eye for combat. They also comment that battle in close quarters, in order to survive, you had to become almost animalistic. During the fight, they realize that there is no one covering the large machine gun that could essentially shred them, and the first person to run towards it is Frank. The large machine gun, by the way, is called Ma Deuce. He is able to secure it just as the rest of the Viet Cong were almost there. Turning the gun forward, he pulled the trigger, laying a bunch of them to waste. And at the end of the fight, the platoon is relieved to see everyone is still alive. But then an explosion in the distance shows that the main artillery base has been destroyed. And now the question is, what awaits them? So there you go. There's the first two issues.
Let me say before I turn it over to you guys, how much I really enjoyed the fact that Garth Ennis goes out of his way to create characters on both sides of the narrative. So this fictional writer who's writing this book about Frank Castle gets both perspectives. He's getting the perspective of the soldiers in the platoon, but he also finds somebody from the Viet Cong to give their perspective. And I think that's important. I think that's truthful. I think that's good writing. I think that's truthful to the art of capturing someone's story, their biography. But I just thought it was good of Garth to sort of to have that detail in the story. The other thing I really loved, first of all, I love the artwork in this. Jesse knows that while I can appreciate some pretty wacky art styles, I like good, clean lines. I like art that I can follow, and it's very clear what's going on in this book. I was able to follow it, just from looking at the pictures. Without I read it, but if I didn't necessarily have the dialogue to kind of in the narrative to take me along, I could have followed what was happening with just the pictures alone. So I thought the artist here, who is Goran Parlov and Jordi Berlaire, did a really, really great job of illustrating this. That picture of the close quarters combat is gruesomely delicious.
Uh-huh.
It's so good. Mm-hmm. It really gives you a feel of what was happening in that particular scene. The other thing that I really like, and I don't remember if it's in this part of it or if they'll get to it later, but it's illustrated in how Frank acts. I think later on in the book, he says, the advice that I got was find somebody who seems like they got their shit together and do what they do. Mm-hmm. And so he listens to, he comes in and he's just gotten out of officer school and he recognizes that he's at a disadvantage and he's trusting the other officers around him to give him advice. And then with that advice, he makes proper leadership decisions. Did either one of you ever watch Deep Space Nine?
A little bit.
No.
Okay. In Deep Space Nine, Worf, who wore the yellow uniform on Next Generation, gets advice from, and I don't remember who in Deep Space Nine, but to go into command, and so he starts wearing the red uniform. And I think it's O'Brien who's like, you need to trust people around you to do what they do well.
Yes.
And that's what I thought about when I saw that about, now later on they'll make fun of him for calling it an airstrike. But it was the right move. There is the enemy. There's no but I think this goes to the bigger story of what Frank Castle is like. He's like, the enemy is over there. We have bombers, we have planes, we have jets, we have aerial bombardment at our disposal. Why are we walking into the wood chipper? So I liked all of that with the first two issues. Chris, let me turn it over to you. What did you think of these first two?
Oh, I really liked it. When we started, when I saw that it was going to be about a writer getting a story, I feel like that's such a trope in comics these days, but it was just done so well that I'm totally down with it. And to your point about getting both sides here, I really appreciated that, and more so, I appreciated that both sides seemed to respect the other. Like, it wasn't just... and of course, this is present day, not under fire, not under the, no bombs bursting. But they recognize that they had something they had to do, and they respect each other. So I really appreciated that. As for Frank going in and what was it? He scored well on his test, and they're like, "Hey, you could be in charge," or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which I'm sure is something that happens, which is terrifying. But no, I really like the way he was portrayed here. Echoing what you said about the airstrike here, it's just it's that whole idea of bringing in an outsider. You work on a problem every which way, but then an outsider comes in and it's like, well, there's the solution right there, and none of us need to get hurt. And it just seems so outlandish because you're just so tunnel viewed into, well, we go, and he's just like, why go? We can blow, and they do. So I really dug that. Him as an outsider, him as a very humble outsider. As right back to what you said with follow a guy you can trust or follow a guy who you think is doing what he's supposed to be doing. Really, such a solid presentation of the Punisher character before he was the Punisher that I think a lot of people discount the character because all they see is the high violence, and even as I joked about earlier, it's like, oh, he's going to fight the mob again. There's more to the character than that, and that was just very well depicted here in these opening issues.
It's one of the Jesse. I'm going to go to you in just a second, but it's one of the things I always liked about the Punisher Netflix series was he wasn't just a guy with a big gun running around the streets of Hell's Kitchen blowing away heroin dealers. Like, if you watch the show, Chris, I understand you don't have television in your home.
No,
but but for the rest of us mortals, if you watch that show and you see Frank Castle with a machine gun, Jesse, remember the way he moved with it?
Sure.
Josh
yeah,
Bernthal.
Josh. Okay.
John Bernthal.
I thought you did that on purpose.
I swear to God I didn't. John Bernthal.
Oh, yes. Yeah, as a matter of fact, it's funny because over the weekend, I just hopped on YouTube, watched the trailer I love the trailer for the first season of The Punisher. Mm-hmm. And I watched the discussion that he had with Daredevil on the rooftop in season 2. And how he walked, how he portrayed this person. It one of my favorite, obviously, castings of the Punisher ever. And yeah, this is a character
second only to Dolph Lundgren.
Sure, yeah, put her right on there. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. I watched some of the highlights of all the seasons over the weekend just because it was a great show. But anyway, go ahead. You were making a point.
Well, he's not, as I said, he's not just a guy blowing away drug dealers. He's a soldier. He's tactical.
Mm-hmm.
There's a way about him, the way he moves, the way he thinks, the way he talks, that is all Marine, all soldier. But it's a soldier just deep in combat. And that's the point of this story, right? The fictional author that's there getting these interviews is getting at, it's a riddle. Who is Frank Castle? Was he always meant to be the Punisher? Was this always inside of him? Or was this something that evolved out of the tragic death of his family? And that's what he's writing the story about, which really makes this, I think, the Platoon kind of a brilliant piece. But I'm talking a lot, so Jesse, tell me what you thought of these first 2 issues.
Okay, so you guys hit on, I have like 3 notes here. You guys hit on 2 of them. Definitely the introduction of the opposing sides and their motivations. Spot on. It was great to see, Ennis give both sides, basically outing them to the reader. Hey, it's not just going to be about the American military ending or fighting in this issue. We got to look at how the Viet Cong are looking at things as well, and the commander, and it's the depiction of the enemy of this book is not Ennis-like, in my opinion. Ennis would, we just talked about Manucci. Think about some of the enemies that the Punisher has. It's bears. Think about some of the enemies that Ennis has created for the Punisher in the past. They're always like overly sadistic and just
Deformed.
Yeah, I mean, there's a problem there, and you don't have that here. And we'll talk. I'll probably touch on that more on after our second synopsis. But there's one spot in this book that really stands out to me, and again, we're trying to get an idea of the Punisher. We're trying to get an idea of Frank Castle as he's dropped into this unit, and on their first interactions with him, the guys start to remember, like, he wasn't wearing his bars on his uniform because he wanted the guys to understand that he was one of them. He didn't want the platoon to look up at him as a leader. He wanted them to look up at him as someone who is coming in with a level head, trying, even though he's got zero combat experience, he wants to learn from those around him, and he doesn't want them to look at him as somebody that is touting their authority over them. One of the, their first mission, I think one of the guys in his platoon says, "Well, we're going out on our mission tomorrow. You would probably want to hang back." And he's like, "No, I can't do that," because he knows how important it is to be there for his men and show that he is one of them first, and that he has their best interest at hand. And that is what leads us to the airstrike at Chubai, where he bent the rules. I wouldn't say bent. He broke some rules where he told them that one of his soldiers saw something, shining in one of the huts or whatever, and that did not happen. All he was doing was acting on the word of his sergeant at that time, and he called in an airstrike. And of course, like you said, they give him a little bit of grief about it. He's new. He's calling in airstrikes. So some people could say, well, he's scared, but that's not the case. He's smart. If there's a possibility that there is somebody in that village that could kill one of his men, he's going to take them out first, and he does so. But there's not a whole lot of Punisher stuff going on in these first two issues, folks. If you come into this book and you're like, all right, here we go, it's Punisher time, you're not going to be thrilled with what happens.
No, and that's why I said it doesn't read like a Punisher mag. It reads like Sergeant Rock. It reads like any one of the, comics that were just written about soldiers.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And the other thing is, and my final thing on these first two, you could tell that the writer wants to get at the heart. Where is that kernel of genesis for the Punisher? And one of the first thing he kind of targets is, Frank's first kill. And they're like, dude, it's wartime. If you want to know what everything was closing in on us. We have people coming at us. We're firing out there. He says, for all I know, Frank could have just seen a black shape and dropped it. Or he may not have shot anybody at all. But if you want to get that, you have to talk to him first. So it's interesting to see these guys who served under Frank kind of talk to the author, the potential author of this book, and how I think they would defend him. Clearly his actions with them are easily defensible. But they don't want any part of demonizing this man. So that's why a lot of times I think there's a couple times throughout this book where they're just like, we don't have an answer for you. There's no answer here. You're just going to get our thoughts on what it was like to serve with him. So I think that's important because, the writer's going to come out of this. I don't know, when we come to the end of this book, what your guys' thoughts are, but I don't think the writer's going to come out of this completely satisfied. But anyway, there you go. There's my view on the first two.
I don't think the riddle ever really gets answered. Which came first, the chicken or the egg with Frank Castle. But one of the things I wanted to, as you were talking, one of the things I thought about was, I love the opening of the book where they're talking about, you guys came home and America lost its innocence, and the soldiers are all like, when the fuck was America innocent?
Yeah.
Where did this myth come from? Which I thought was great.
Yep.
You know,
was.
I think the United States, without getting on my soapbox, I think the United States in its history, like any country throughout time, you know, through the great expanse of human existence, is a mixed bag. I think that's the only fair assessment any fair-minded person can come away with. Is we've done some great things with the advancements in technology and freedom. There's been some great things that the American country has done. There have been some awful things too. You know, for every wonderful thing we've done a horrendous thing. And so, you know, a mixed bag at best. So I love the idea of, like, we were never innocent. What's wrong with you? And I have to really give it to Garth Ennis to sort of address that right at the top of the book. Go ahead and do the next synopsis there, Jess.
Okay, issue 3, the Black Rifles. Knowing their main base has been destroyed, Frank and the platoon prepare to dig in as the Tet surround them to attack. During this, a torrential rainstorm begins as their guns, the M16s, continue to jam over and over. Luckily, an airstrike drops ordnance close enough to the hill to kill the enemy, but also practically bury the platoon in mud. As the action subsides, Frank arranges a risky trade to go get some M14s, as they seem to be a solid gun that all of them were trained on and has rare issues out in the field. Enacting the plan and getting the job done, the platoon are getting a handle on their rifles. They spot an armed soldier hiding behind a tree, and Frank uses his guns to shoot through the tree, killing him. On the other side of the battlefield, Colonel Giap again tries to convince Lee to see the big picture and understand she needs to fight for her country and not for herself. Now, that's a common thread. I'm probably going to say that one more time before we reach the end of this issue. But it seems like no matter what, Lee is focused on getting revenge, and Colonel Giap is trying to explain, don't waste your talent, don't waste your time.
The war is bigger than Frank Castle.
Yes, please. So issue 4, Absolute Consequences. The platoon have some much-needed R&R, and they are out on the town for some heated debauchery. Frank and his sergeant are the only two of the platoon that abstain and have a beer together. As the two talk, Frank explains that he believes his only duty is to try to bring all of his men back alive. Frank is asked if he is enjoying the warfare of Nam, and he says it answers something in him. After finishing their fun while actually running out of money, the platoon find themselves at a diner and get into a fist fight with some Green Berets who accuse the Marines of abandoning them. Frank talks them down, and it is clear the fight between him and the Green Beret would have resulted in someone dying. Sister Lee tells Senior Colonel Letrong Giap the tale of how a squad of Americans came into her village and killed everyone, including her mother, father, and sister. The colonel confides that he has ordered worse things for his soldiers to do in the battle, and that in the battles that he has been in. Sister Lee has captured a Marine lieutenant after Castle's platoon has left, and she killed the rest. And now the colonel is not pleased. However, Lee obviously takes pleasure in it. Giap asks the prisoner about the morale of the people in the U.S., to which he finds out the U.S. believes the death toll is too high and talks need to start happening. And that's kind of where we end issue 4. Mark?
Let me get Chris in here, because you and I have been talking for a while. Chris, what did you think of issues 3 and 4?
I thought 4 was probably the strongest of the entire run. I really enjoyed Frank's conversation with the other fella, and avoiding the whores. I thought that was pretty cool.
They both have significant others, and they at least have honor enough to try not to
screw around.
Screw that up.
They also probably didn't want the syphilis.
They don't want the SIF. Yeah, they do not want the SIF. But no, I thought this was another really good take. I mean, you had Frank trying to get the guns and stuff, and I love the conversation he had with I don't remember the name of the guy who was selling him guns, or the guy who was going to get him the guns. But I remember at the end of that conversation, he mentions he's like, I hear heroin's coming into the country, and he's like, but not to my hill. Yeah. I thought that was really cool. The Green Beret fight, such a badass scene. Frank just comes in and he's like, get your men under control, and then they go nose to nose, and the guy blinks first. I just thought that was awesome.
It's so interesting how they're, Frank's platoon looks compared to the Green Berets. Like Frank's platoon looked like scrawny,
like misfits.
guys.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the Cosby Kids. It was like it was funny, but I mean, I just loved the whole that issue. I mean, if we just read that one issue, I'd have been happy. That was a really good issue. I loved him bonding with the other guy, with the significant other. Just thought this was really fantastic. If more Punisher stories were like this, I'd probably read a lot more Punisher stories.
Yeah, I really liked. I think Chris is dead on, and I don't want to just parrot what he said, except to say that I really enjoyed that issue as well. I love the stare down between him and the Green Beret, and the Green Beret backing down. I have to focus on that line from Frank about it answers something within me.
Yes, yeah, that was meant to be, because it's almost just so standalone.
And I don't know if that got relayed to the writer, but it's a part of this story, and it does, to a degree, answer the question, was the Punisher always within Frank Castle? Did it just need something to unlock it? That somewhere deep inside Frank Castle needs a war to fight. And I've heard that. I've heard that about, like, the character of John Rambo. John Rambo always needs a war. That's the way they write him. And there are some people that are like that. They don't necessarily always re-up for the military because they need to go home. They need a break, but they feel almost lost without that mission.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because they talk in the book about they don't even know what they understand the general gist of what they're doing in Vietnam, but nobody can really answer what the specificity of the mission statement is. They just know that the Viet Cong are the enemy and they should kill them.
Yeah, and
that's
protect
it.
this right here. Protect this piece of land,
right?
And that's all you got to do.
Protect your base. Protect this piece of land. Advance here. Go here. There's the very, very direct, very minuscule mission of the day. Go clear this field. That sort of thing. And there are certain guys that are wired to, that's all they need. They need to wake up in the morning and have a very clear, someone needs to wind them up, point them in a direction and say, go.
Yeah. With us not being, obviously, I was never a military man. I never joined up or did any of that. And I can tell you that I have the luxury of sitting here and looking at the big picture. Somebody in the trenches, in the uniform, with the gun at their side, it's probably best that they don't look at the big picture because you're going to get disillusioned pretty damn quick.
Do you remember, speaking of war movies, do you remember, I think it's Saving Private Ryan that opens up with, I think it's D-Day?
Yeah.
Could you imagine, you're on those boats?
And if you're on the front, you're dead.
Right.
I mean,
they're not really thinking about, they're not thinking about the bigger mission here.
No,
they're thinking, gee whiz, I hope I don't get caught by a bullet.
I hope I can make it at least 50 yards in.
I hope I get off this boat.
Yeah, it's horrifying. It is horrifying. We watched that movie. It was me, my daughter, and my wife. We sat down and watched that movie probably a couple months ago. And you put yourself in that position. And just sitting there, that's what it opens up with. You're looking at the person beside you. 1 minute, the gates drop, and they're dead. And it's just horrific.
Mm-hmm. I also think about, this might strike people as kind of funny as to draw as an example, but I don't know. I've always appreciated the movie Forrest Gump and what it was trying to say, and I think about Forrest the character who never really asked any questions or thought about things on a very deep level. I think he ends up in Nam just because it's like he's done with college, he's done running the football, until everyone yells stop at him. And they're like, you should join the army. Okay. And off he goes and enlists. Yep. And then it's as I was saying before, go out on patrol. Okay. And that was it. I think the one scene where he keeps running back into fire to rescue the rest of his platoon from being gunned down, he's still just acting on instinct.
Yes.
And not really thinking about the greater implications of the Cold War and, the proxy war in Vietnam.
He's thinking of his friend Bubba.
He was thinking of Bubba. He was thinking of everybody. Like, he ran back and saved quite a few people.
Yeah, his intent was to go get Bubba, and then it just kept getting the wrong person until finally he found Bubba.
But no, my point is, and to the greater point is, like, when you're in the thick of it, as these movies portray, you're not really thinking about the greater implications of a geo-nuclear politics, geopolitics. You're just thinking about, what do I have to do today to get back to the base alive?
Yeah. I agree. I'll throw my 2 cents in here real quick. So, Colonel Giap is not, again, the Ennis villain that anybody is probably going to expect. There's a scene, I think it's in the 4th issue, where he is, face to face with that American prisoner that Lee brought to him. And I was just waiting for something sadistic to happen. Like, oh, you don't want to talk? Okay, get the rats. I'm like, oh shit, here we go. That doesn't happen. He's very calm. He's very collected. You can tell this is a person, a leader of wartime who understands the big picture and is still able to serve his country.
Yeah,
and
this isn't the Vietnamese in, like, the second Rambo movie, where they're just, like, fucking sadistic.
Exactly.
Or any, like, the Chuck Norris fucking oh god, what were those movies? Missing in Action.
Missing in Action. Yep. Yeah. He has a calm conversation with this prisoner, and the one thing that he kind of latches onto and wants to find out is American morale about the war, because he has an idea of how he wants to find out or get an idea of how this war is going to end. And he knows that in the long run, they'll have obviously a better chance of winning this war, or at least surviving the war, if the American people are not behind the troops.
Well, a lot has been written about how, gun for gun, bullet for bullet, the American military probably could have taken out any country on Earth. But if the
that's mentioned in this book, yeah. He says, he lists how they could have just how much pounds of ordnance per person there were.
Right, but what defeated. What has been written, and Chris, if you have some thoughts on this, please don't be shy. But what has been written about the Vietnam War, and really, if you think about it, the modern wars in the Middle East, has been the single greatest enemy the United States has ever faced has been itself. Mm-hmm. That when the people don't support the war, or when the news is actively reporting on the amount of deaths going on, as if people don't die in war, as if that's not the stated mission objective. That the war falls apart for the U.S. Like, if people, that's kind of the story of Vietnam, is once the United States lost the support of the American people, it became almost impossible to do anything, and eventually the United States just crumbled and left. And just left Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And so if you're one of these countries out there, you'll never match us with, you'll never match us bullet for bullet. But if you can get public opinion on your side, if you're the Iraqis, if you're the Vietnamese, if you're, Syrians, if you're, whatever, and you can get the American people to sympathize with you, the American military is done.
Yeah.
There's no fight. Am I making sense here?
100%.
Okay.
Well, and the other thing that I took out of these issues, in regards to Frank's character, the one thing that stuck out to me is that his guys notice that he has a singular focus to get the job done, and there's a whole almost like heist subplot when they go to get these M14s, which is pretty funny when they all get back on the plane, and one guy's like, why the hell did we get back on the plane? They could have just left, but they didn't. And it's because, most likely, it's because Frank is there putting them on a mission, and they're starting to have faith in him a lot more, because he's taking a huge risk. I mean, this is a huge risk. He's stealing from his own military, basically, and he's doing it for his own squad, his platoon. So obviously the amount of respect goes up astronomically when they follow him into that and they come out of that, and he made sure the job got done. So there you go.
Chris, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or are we ready to move on to issues 5 and 6?
Oh no, everything you guys said was perfect there. You know me, I don't follow the real world. I stay out of the real world as much as possible. So I don't know a heck of a lot outside of watching a few episodes of China Beach back in the day about Vietnam and the Wonder Years. So don't know a whole heck of a lot. So we could probably just move on.
All right.
All right.
Take me home, baby doll.
All right, issue 5, Deadfall. Frank's platoon is back in action and is ordered to go recover the bodies of some fellow soldiers in a swamp, and are not able to use the radio due to a weak battery. Under the cover of the surrounding jungle, they try to get the radio to the top of a tree and get a signal out. But soon the platoon begins to get mortared. From afar, Sister Lee is watching them and realizes she sees the man that called in the airstrike. In a desperate attempt to survive, the platoon's plan is to call in another airstrike while running back to the swamp. As the bombs explode, Frank and their medic head back to grab a couple of soldiers that were caught in the explosion. Lee is able to safely get into the trees, and when the airstrike hits, or after the airstrike hits, she drops a grenade, taking Frank by surprise and jumping down, burying a knife in Frank's back. In issue 6, titled Happy Childhoods, and we're starting the final issue here, Lee is grappled onto Frank's back with knife in hand, ready to stab him once more. Barely able to stand with Lee on his back, Frank stumbles around and then falls full force backward, dropping Lee onto a rock, I assume breaking her spine. Frank stumbles around and then he staggers up and sees his attacker lying on the ground, and then grabs a knife and swiftly kills her. As it appears the members of his platoon may be killed as another airstrike drops, Frank is somehow able to keep them safe. With the break in the attack, the evac comes, rescuing all of the members of the platoon. And shortly after this, we have the epilogue to our story, where all the platoon members, and we see where all the platoon members go. Some go home, others go back in for another tour, but all thankful for being under the leadership of their LT, Frank Castle, as they all made it back that day. And that's 5 and 6. Mark Radulich.
I'm going to give my whole assessment here. First of all, that's a pretty gruesome death for the girl. I mean, she
stabbed him quick.
She stabbed him in the shoulder, but like the way the artist drew, the impact of her on the rock and everything. I mean, it no pun intended, it's impactful.
It's kind of like, just real quick on her death.
Sure.
It's kind of like, she built herself up. She was going to take this guy out, and no matter how much, the colonel tried to talk her into staying and just do some good with the skill set that you have, she was obviously obsessed. I can't blame her after the story she told, but the thing is that it's such like an unremarkable death. Mm-hmm. I mean, she gets dropped onto her back. Yeah, it looks gruesome, but there's all this build-up. She jumps on his back, stabs him once, and boom, it's over. Frank wins. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I think there's a point to that. And the point is clearly the colonel that had been talking to her this whole time was right. Don't waste your talents. And she completely did, and it ended like that.
Well, the story is ultimately about revenge and vengeance. Mm-hmm. It's vengeance. It's the need for revenge. It's the unquenchable thirst for blood that drives Frank Castle into the streets as the Punisher after his family is gunned down. What the writer is getting at is that the death of this girl was somehow like the key to understanding who Frank Castle is. Except that the way that it's done, she attacked him first, and he defended himself. That could have been anybody. It could have been a dude. It could have been a child. It was somebody with a knife trying to kill Frank Castle in the middle of a war zone. And
Yeah,
so
and
I don't know if that incident, if Garth Ennis is telling us like this is the quintessential moment where something, where we begin to see the emergence of what would be the Punisher, and I'm thinking to myself, but she started it. Well, what was he supposed to do? You see what I'm saying? Like, people will get tragic things happen to people all the time. Children lose parents. Unfortunately, all the time, and not everybody goes into the streets and becomes a vigilante. And so, not that it didn't work for me, because I liked it as part of the story, but the idea that this writer is like, this right here, let's draw a circle around it, this speaks to the mindset of Frank Castle, that, that's kindling for what will become the Punisher. I'm like, I don't know if the math works there.
Well, okay. So, one of the things I would maybe use to kind of point you toward what I think Ennis is trying to get at is, remember what the sergeant says while the guy is interviewing him. That is, the writer's like, hey, I want to find out what did he do? Did she look at him like, okay, with respect for an enemy, or he was going to come over and end it swiftly? And the sergeant's like, it was basically none of our business. Yeah. It's none of our business. And I honestly think that's what Ennis is trying to say. I think he's like, you could just try and keep digging and digging and digging on this character to try and find out
why are you the Punisher, but why are you the Punisher, why are you the Punisher? And at the end of the day, it's like, does it really matter?
Yeah, wow. It's his war. It's not ours. It's his war to understand. It's not ours. So he walks over there and he swiftly kills her. And seriously, if you think about it, what we've read with Ennis, and we talked about the over-the-top villains that he's had, the absolute gore that we've seen. Remember the issue where like the guy's intestines was strung up in a tree? You get none of that here. Right. You get Frank Castle thinking, holy shit, there's somebody on my back. I've got a knife there, and she's about to stab me again. And I looked over those panels like 3 or 4 times, like, okay, does he know what he's doing? Is he being tactical about it? Well, I don't think he is. I don't even think he knows the rock's there.
That's what I'm wondering. I'm like, does this work better in the story if he kills her in cold blood, not in defense? What do you think, Chris? I mean, you have that interaction with them. You have him killing her. You have like what's supposed to be like this greater meaning, possibly.
I didn't see any greater meaning to it. I just saw it as a very unspectacular death that was built up over several issues.
Okay.
I saw it as this was the scene we were being trained to look forward to this scene, right? I mean, from the outset. And I mean, at the end of the day, war is hell, right? She jumps on, she doesn't do the killing blow, and pays for it. It was a very unspectacular way for her to die. And to Jesse's point here, it might not be proving the guy's point, her brother's point about how exceptional she is. It might be disproving it and saying she is not. Because had she been exceptional, she would have got him in the heart. She would have put him down with a single blow. Because you don't jump onto a person who's twice your size with a weapon and think you're going to have to take multiple blows. So she was not a tactician. She was not what she was being built to be, which I thought was perfect. Because that's just, I mean, it's war. Yeah, it's war, and it sucks.
She was absolutely acting out of rage.
Of course. She was clouded. She was definitely clouded. She was definitely not seeing the bigger picture, and I think that that's what hoisted her, and that's I really appreciated how quickly it was done, because I was expecting, from comics, we're expecting that this is going to be the fight scene that's going to fill the final issue, and it was done in the first page or two, which I thought was really cool. It really subverted my what I expected, and I thought that was great, and I definitely loved the scene where they flash back to the present, and the guy's like, well, what do you think they said to each other? What was the look like? And it's like, well, none of your fucking business, you know. I thought that was great because, I mean, you got to figure all four men at that table have probably been in similar positions. And it's like, and they know what it's like to stare someone in the eyes who would kill you if you didn't kill them first in the heat of battle. And that's probably not something they want to revisit and share and advertise and be like, oh, yeah, you know, he looked and I winked and, you know, he knew, hey, you're just doing your job. They don't want to live through that again. They don't want to explain that to some idiot writing. I just thought I thought the whole thing was beautifully put together, subverting the expectation and letting Frank do what he did.
So overall, let me just say I really love this story. I think it's one of the. I haven't read a lot of Punisher, but what I've read of Punisher, this has probably been the best one. And Garth Ennis is one of those writers that I'm at a point where I'll try anything that he's written because he hasn't failed me yet. I love the art in this. I love the portrayal of Frank Castle as not a Superman, but a guy who is like a born soldier. I love that. I love that take on the Punisher. That he's not just a guy with a gun shooting drug dealers, but that he's a soldier fighting a war. But, you know, the war is at home now.
There's a weird innocence to him here.
Yeah.
Very weird innocence.
That first page where you see him, his full face, I was like, he just looks like well, I don't say young. He's a completely young kid, but I mean, he's old enough to have a little scruff on his face. But I mean, he's put in this leadership position. It's not what you're used to. Not what you're used to at all.
Mm-hmm. Jesse, what did you think of it overall?
I enjoyed it, man. It was definitely a swerve. I mean, we were all announced up, and we're like, here we go. It's going to be. And then there's points throughout the book where you do get a little bit of satisfactory gore if that's what you came here for. But it's not because the Punisher is punishing somebody. He is not that. He is a soldier through and through, an intelligent man who's able to make smart decisions in order to keep his company alive. It's not the Punisher, the Ennis Punisher that I thought we were going to get, but I'm completely stoked with what the end product was here with this story. It's the framework of Vietnam, all of the stuff that went into it. You know, it makes for a setting that I think helps boost. You know, this is a person who's went into war, and there's nobody is happy with this war that's happening. But Frank's got to go into this with just one thing: get the job done, and that's what he does. That's what he does. And yeah, there may be something, just like he says, there may be something in the killing that kind of calls to him. And I don't think he says it's the killing. It's the warfare. That's the key. I don't think it's the killing that makes him happy. It's the warfare that does. Mm-hmm. And that's why, you know, Frank is the Punisher now, because he is waging war upon crime. But
do you think this is something they could ever make a movie out of, or like a Disney? Not Disney, but like a
Yep. Punisher comes to Disney, folks. He's kind of already there.
Like a limited, like 8-episode limited series. You think this lends itself to something cinematic, or it just works fine as a comic?
I think it's going to have to stay as a comic. I can tell you that if you put this out there. If you put this out there after having we had 2 seasons of The Punisher, it's going to be so different from what people really enjoyed already. I don't think it would do that well. That'd be my opinion. I mean, if you take this story and tell it without the expectations of The Punisher, then okay, because again, this story is
maybe an episode or 2.
Okay,
maybe as part of like a flashback.
I wouldn't mind that. I wouldn't mind that at all, because you see the tactician in him here. You see the soldier in him, and you see the fact that he really wants to protect people. That is one of his main goals. Clearly, here that's what he intends to do. It might be goal number 2 now, But yeah, I did have some notes here about just the final part where the writer is talking to the group, and he mentioned that Colonel Giap's still alive, and he went and interviewed him. And there's one small thing that he says at the end. He says that in a microcosm, what was going on in, oh my goodness, what was the name of the village, or not the village, but the place they're at?
Vietnam.
I had it here. Vietnam. Khe Sanh. He was talking about the battle at Khe Sanh. He says that in a microcosm, it represented what Vietnam was. The Americans were there fighting, and they didn't know what they were fighting for. It was a war about nothing for them. But then he corrects himself. He says that's not really the case. He says the people in the war may not have been fighting for the specific goals of America, but they were fighting for each other at that point. And that's what Frank Castle was doing here. He was fighting to keep his men alive. And but then Khe Sanh says love is not enough to win a war. And he's right. Unfortunately, that's the truth. You're not going to win a war on love alone. But it may help keep your men alive. So I really enjoyed it, man. This was a good Ennis Punisher books. Minus, you didn't have a whole lot of exacting vengeance. Punisher didn't flip his shit and start cutting people up and stringing them everywhere. And it was solid.
All right. Chris, you got anything else you want to add? Otherwise, we're going to close it out for the night.
No, just really, really enjoyed it. Wasn't expecting anything really out of it because I just really haven't been a big Punisher guy of late, but this was this subverted every one of my expectations, and I really, really enjoyed it.
Well, I'm glad we got a chance to talk about it. I thought we had a very nice discussion about this book. I don't know how well known this book is. I mean, it's got on the wiki, it's got some comic book roundup ratings that are all near to 10. The estimated sales, it was like 73rd, 100th, 106th, 101st, 108th, 109th. But it's like it's nothing I'd ever even heard of until I had just happened to see it in the bookstore. Had you guys heard of this before?
I hadn't. No, I mean,
no.
Like I said, this is 14 years after Bourne, and I imagine it probably got a little bit of press because Ennis is coming back to do the Punisher. Of course, I don't know if he's doing the Punisher at this time. I don't think this is 2017. I don't know where he's at. I don't know if he's doing the Boys at this time or he's doing both of them at the same time. Either way, Ennis doing the Punisher is something to talk about. But there's a very good possibility there wasn't much buzz because of just kind of like what we said. A lot of people went into it expecting one thing and got another.
Last week we talked Batman Dark Victory. I had Benjamin J. Colon and Alexis Hana on. Alexis Hana then came back the next day and we reviewed Muppets Now. And then Jesse and I did a very, very quick review of the new Marilyn Manson Shooter Jennings Duets album, We Are Chaos. Next week we've got a couple of shows dedicated to Stargirl. We're going to look at the first 6 issues of Stars and Stripe. I'm going to have somebody new join the podcast. It's Dave from Dave's Comic Blog, so that'll be fun. It'll be nice to have somebody new to talk to, and he's a very prolific writer. I'll give him that. Like he's got something going every day, sometimes multiple things. Chris Sheehan will be back on Tuesday of next week. We'll be talking Clash of the Champions, and then in the evening I'll have Dave back, and then Al Sedano will be talking the Stargirl series on the CW / DC Universe. So that'll be fun. Stargirl was a really fun show. Tomorrow night, Pat Mullen and Robert Winfrey will be talking the MMA show Kingdom. And then Jesse's going to back me into a corner and beat me and make me admit that Cuties is hardcore pornography.
Oh, I sure hope not. I hope that's not what we walk away with. Hope Netflix didn't approve that.
We were going to talk the new Fin Troll album, but instead Jesse and I are going to have a raucous caucus over the show Cuties, also known as Mignons. Mignons? I don't know how to speak French. Yes, it's the controversial movie that Netflix is currently exhibiting, French movie about the gal who seeks to find an identity through dancing, and the dancing is
risque.
Lurid
Is
would
that
be the word I
French?
would use.
Oh,
Risque.
okay. Ooh.
Risque
Okay.
is also a word. So Jesse will not subject himself to this movie, but he's got questions that need answers.
That's
so
right.
we'll talk about it this week. And then the Metal Hammer Doom will return next week with BPMD American Made. It's a covers album because October is covers month, all month long. And then October 1st, Andrew Graham and I will talk the final season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. We've never talked about it before on here, so we'll do a quick review of the first 6 seasons, and then we'll talk season 7 at length. And that wraps it up for me. Chris Sheehan, what do you got going on?
Oh, I've taken a project where I'm trying to put out a new show every day of the month for September, and so far it's been a success. Tomorrow, I don't know when this goes out. Is this going out today?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so tomorrow, or today if you hear this the next day, we have a very special episode of Morituri Mondays where we have a Q&A with the original artist and co-creator, Brent Anderson, part 1 of 2. And,
I'm excited.
It's a goodie. It's a goodie. And I also spend about 10 minutes talking about the, is Elvis dead or alive, which is an interesting conversation. It's something that's always fascinated me and gotten under my skin. So I finally got the opportunity to discuss it by shoehorning it into a Morituri episode. But that's going to be a goodie. Also, there's a show called X-Lapsed I'm working on where I'm going through the entire House of X, Powers of X, Dawn of X run, the current run of X-Men books by Jonathan Hickman, because, I let them kind of pile up. And the only way I get to read anything is if I talk about it. So there we go. I have to talk about it in order to read it, and I wanted to read it. So that's what I'm doing. So that's almost every day. On days that other shows don't show up, there will be an X-Lapsed. You can find the audio archives at chrisandreggie.podbean.com. I'm still compiling the final episode of the Cosmic Treadmill.
I wanted to know, are you done with the porn comics yet? Because I've been listening to those.
They're done. Yeah, there were only 4 of them. So there's one more episode of the Cosmic Treadmill, which is a recording that Reggie and I did about 5 years ago. That's going to tie a bow on that entire show. But I'm opening up the mic to anybody who wanted to talk about their memories of the show, anything they liked, anything they didn't like, all that stuff. So I just haven't been able to touch base with everybody who wanted to be involved. So it's kind of just on hold, got a pin in it until I can get a hold of everybody. This is a thing I only want to do once. I don't want to revisit it once the door's shut behind it. But that's coming eventually, hopefully sooner than later. But yeah, Morituri, X-Lapsed, Chris is on InfiniteEarths.com, Ace Comics on Twitter.
Jesse, say goodnight, Gracie.
We ain't done just yet. Hold on now. I do want to say thanks to anybody out there that's been listening to any episode in the past 6 years. We appreciate it here at the Source Material Comics Podcast. And even though I'm not currently on hosting duties right now, I know Mark Radulich is holding the block down and bringing people in to do these episodes, and I cannot thank you, Mark Radulich, enough for what you're doing here. I do want to point out that I should be I will be I will be on the next episode of From Claremont to Claremont, which Christian will be compiling. He's probably in the midst of compiling that one together as well. So keep an ear out. That'll probably drop. Just pay attention to the website that Chris dropped there. And I think that's it. I'm not doing much anything else. These essential days have me in a bind to where I can't do any podcasting. But hey, every once in a while I'll come out from under my rock and show up here. So, Mark Radulich, take us home.
All right, that's it for Source Material Live. I keep wanting to call it the comic book store. That's it for Source Material Live. I want to thank Jesse and I want to thank Chris for hanging out with me tonight, talking this really groovy comic called Platoon. Until next time, be well, be safe, and behave.